Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher here at Sweetwater, and today's Synth Clips is about Glide. And again, Glide is so simple. I already know what you do. You turn the glide all the way left and you have no glide. You turn glide all the way right and you have a nice long glide. And that's true. And basically, for some people, that's all they'll ever use with Glide. But there are actually quite a few parameters associated with Glide that are worth learning about. And when you find the different parameters, settings that you like, in this synth, for example, they're global, and so once you set those, you never have to worry about them again and simply use the glide knob again like you want to use it. So we're going to talk about all those. I'm going to right now use the Moog Matriarch semi-modular analog synthesizer, but then later I'm going to use a monophonic synth and probably use a sub 37, and I'll show you that as well. So what are we talking about when we're saying glide? Basically, in an analog synthesizer, every time you choose a different key, you're sending out a different amount of voltage. Moog is set up to do 1 volt per octave. So if you had a 5-octave keyboard, every time you went up 1 octave, it would have 1 more volt than the amount of voltage from the octave below it. And so back in the 60s, they cleverly came up with a parameter called glide that said, well, what if you could slowly go from 1 voltage when you press a key to a different key, and that glides to that voltage, and it makes the glide sound that we all know, this one. Okay, we like glide. It helps us ride the storm out. But now there are some really important things to think about. So first, I'm going to have to talk about triggering in general and preference for high key, low key, or last key. And to do that on the Matriarch, I'm going to have to teach you about how to get to the global settings of this. And it's a little difficult, especially the first couple times you do it, but I recommend printing out, and I'll show you, print out pages 61 through 69 of the Matriarch Owner's Manual, and just keep it handy. And basically what it does is it shows you all of the key presses to get many of these global parameters that you set that are exactly right for you. And like I said, most of the time, once you set them, you don't have to set them again. But first, I'm going to talk about triggering. I'm going to choose whether I want the low key or the high key or my last key to start a new note. And I currently have it set at low key just so you see something that's different than what you're used to. And that is if I hit a note and then hit a high note while I'm still holding the low note, it's not going to sound. That's because it has what we call low note priority. If I set it to high note priority, then every time I hit a note higher than the other note I'm holding, it would jump to that note. Honestly, I've never, ever found a use for low note priority or high note priority. I always use last note. It has always done exactly what I expect. So I would recommend to you to set it that way. It's usually the default on most synthesizers, but some synths it's not. So it's always good to know what that is. So how do you do it? I don't want to go into a long thing about how to do globals on this, so I'm just going to do it, and maybe that'll help you get how some of the other ones work. So the first thing you do is you take the handy dandy printout that you made, and on page 61 it tells you to get into the global settings. You hold the shift button, then hold sync enable until it blinks. That blinking is telling you you're in global mode. So I go to the next page, and the very first thing is note priority, and it tells me the parameter select key is C#0, which they're calling this key here. So if I press it, it's saying sync enable button blinks 1 time, and sure enough, there it is, 1 time with some space in between. And it's telling me that I can press either C0 for low, D0 for high, or E0 for last. And you saw how only notes lower than the note I was holding would trigger. Now I'm going to press E0 and then get out of this mode by pressing the sync enable button 1 more time. And now, if you remembered that if I held a note and played higher, you didn't hear anything, and now you do. In fact, any note that I'm holding, when I let go, it jumps back to that note and it'll sound again. So that's the one I always leave it in. It is the default for the Matriarch, but it was important that I show it to you. And the Matriarch, it can do polyphony. It's called Paraphony because each note doesn't get its own filter. But at heart, it really still is a monophonic synthesizer. And in a monophonic synthesizer, typically when you hold one note and then hold another note without letting go of the first note, it doesn't re-trigger the envelope. So your filter envelope doesn't trigger and your amp envelope doesn't trigger. And I have a real simple envelope going here, so it hits loud, it fades a little, and the filter closes a little. And you can hear that when I play legato, it's not retriggering the envelopes. It is playing the new note, but not retriggering the envelope. As opposed to... And get used to that mode and get good at doing that, because if you can control when you're holding more than one note or not when you're doing monophonic, it really lets you do accents whenever you want. And it's a really, really useful accent tool for live playing. It definitely can make you more expressive, especially on synths that don't have velocity. That's kind of your only tool for giving a little stab or a little accent, is whether you're playing disconnected or in a legato mode. Now, if I want every single note to retrigger, they have a multi-trigger button here. And when that's on, notice that every time I play a note, even if I'm holding other notes down, they will retrigger. Okay, as opposed to this. Okay, I'm going to leave it the multi-trigger mode off for now, because now I want you to become aware of legato, because legato not only determines whether your envelopes retrigger, it can also determine whether the glide works or not, which is really cool, because now not only are you able to stab envelopes or not based on legato or not, but you're also able to have a glide that doesn't work until you're holding more than one note down at once. So I have my glide knob over here. I'm going to turn it all the way to the left, which means no glide. And then I'm going to turn it up. And notice that I still don't have glide. That's because I have legato mode on right now, which is the way I like it. So if I want glide, I simply hold a note and then press another note. And here's what that sounds like with multi-trig on. Okay. Now, sometimes you don't want legato mode. Sometimes you want glide to work all the time. Now, on the Matriarch, the way they engage legato glide or not is you hold the shift and you turn the glide knob either fully counterclockwise or fully clockwise. So if I go fully counterclockwise, the legato mode is now off, and you'll see that no matter what I do, I have glide. Now, that certainly can be useful for certain situations, but I find I don't like it. It's musically hard to play if you're always gliding, especially if your glide is going slow. Oh, no, by the way, I have a little bit of the gorgeous stereo ping pong delay on just to create a little bit of ambience, because I want you to feel the motion a little bit better, and having a little tail of delay helps accentuate the glide. So this is legato off for glide, which certainly can be useful, especially if you're doing a certain riff that needs that glide on all the time. But now watch what happens. Again, I hold shift and I turn this fully clockwise. Now legato glide is on, and so I can. That's also really useful when you're arpeggiating or sequencing, because it very much changes what an arpeggiation sounds like, whether you have that turned on or off. And on a sequence, if you tie notes, then only those notes will glide. That's a real common TB303 acid bass trick, to only have glide at certain moments. Okay, so on the Matriarch, there are three different glide types. There's LCR, or linear constant rate, and by linear, just a straight line, linear constant time, or LCT, and then exponential, like that. The first one, linear constant rate, is probably the one you're the most used to, even if you've never heard that phrase before. Basically what it's saying, imagine if your glide is a car going from one note to whatever note you pick next. The car goes at the same speed, regardless if you're going next door or going from, New York to California. The car's going at the same amount of speed to get there. So watch this. I'll do a half step, and I will do an octave greater, 2 octaves greater than that. Okay, so it definitely takes longer to get to the greater distance, and that's kind of the way we're normally used to how it works. However, they have a linear constant time, and so now I'm going to go back into that common global mode. So I do shift, hold sync enable, It blinks. And here it's telling me that glide type is D sharp 0. So I touch D sharp 0 once. And then it tells me that I've got three choices. C0 for linear constant rate, D0 for linear constant time, or E0 for exponential. And again, don't worry about this too much because you're going to do it once and you're going to find the one you like and you probably won't change it again, and it does stay after power off. So, but now I'm going to go to linear constant time, which is D0. So I press D0 and then I turn that off. And now what you're going to see is when I make a short glide or I make a long glide, if it's a long glide, the rate is simply going to go faster to get there in exactly the same time as it did to take the short one. So here's half step. Notice all of a sudden I haven't changed my glide time, but it's taking longer to get to the short distance because it's not at a constant rate. It's now at a constant time to get to the new note. But you'll notice that when I do that all the way up here, it gets there in exactly the same time. As opposed to, and I'll go back to the other one, Shift, Sync Enable till it blinks, hit D sharp 0, and press C, turn it off. And now, once again, it takes longer to go a greater distance, as opposed to a short distance. And why would you use a linear constant time? I don't use it very often, but I sat here and tried to think of a situation where I would use it. Let's say you were doing some sort of glide from chord to chord and you were going along with some drum beat, and no matter which chord you went to, you always wanted it to land at the new chord at the same amount of time, regardless of what chord you were going to. That would be an example of that. And the last one is exponential. So we'll set that up. We'll do our global. I do my D sharp 0, except this time I hit E0, I turn it off, and it does not go linearly. In other words, it doesn't climb at the same rate. It climbs a little differently. So it was an old cop show that did that. And you can definitely hear, and I'll go slower now, you'll hear that it starts quicker and then takes a while before it finally lands on the exact pitch. You know, it's like if somebody was turning a knob and as they were getting close, they slowed down to be a little more accurate. It's an interesting sound. It definitely, to my ears, sounds more 1970s, but I don't use it that much. So I'm going, once again, back to my favorite, which is a linear constant rate. So I did that. I hit my C sharp, or my D sharp 0, and I hit C0. And now I'm back to the good old. So it takes a short amount of time to do a short distance, a longer amount of time to do a longer distance. And then there's another one. This one's kind of weird. I never use it, and I couldn't even come up with a situation of why I would want to use it, but it was available in the older synths, and so just legacy, they brought it back. If any of you have a really good use for it, please write it in the comments. I'd love to know how somebody uses this, and that's called gated glide. And what it does is, it glides for as long as you're holding a key down, but the moment you let go of a key, it stops gliding. Like it never actually gets to the note you were supposed to get to. And what that does is it leaves your note in kind of a weird tuning because you never know when you let go if you're going to be perfectly in tune or not. I do it once again, Shift, Sync Enable. This time for gated glide, I hit F sharp 0, and my choice is off or on. It's been off, but now I'm going to turn it on. And watch, when I let go, it stops gliding. And I'm going to put some release on it so that you really hear that the note stopped gliding. It never got to the note I wanted it to get to. Do you hear how it's out of tune? So it's there, If you have a really good use for it, tell me, because I would love to know what that is. I'm going to turn that back off. Again, Shift, Sync Enable. I know it's F sharp and the off is C0. Hear how after I let the keys go, it's still gliding. I'll even turn the release up more. That's the one I use. But now I've shown you all three of the different modes: linear constant rate, which is the one I always use and is usually the default; linear constant time, that always gets to whatever note you press at the same amount of time regardless of the distance; and exponential, which kind of slows down as you get closer and closer to the note. And then I've shown you gated glide, where the glide stops working as soon as you let go of all keys. So now one last thing I want to show you on this one is, because it does paraphony or multiple notes, I'm going to switch to a 4-voice mode, and polyphonic glide is really a beautiful thing. So I'm going to just hold a 4-note chord and then play a different 4-note chord, and it'll glide to it. And if you know the THX sound, you know, that you hear in the movie theater right before the movie starts, the way you do that is you simply hit some notes really high and really low, and then play a C major chord in the middle, and all the notes come towards C major. Okay, let's try it on a different synth. Now we have the Moog Subsequent 37 monophonic synthesizer up. It does have all the same features that we saw on the Matriarch. So I've got LCR, or linear constant rate, LCT, linear constant time, and exponential. I've got a switch now up front for gated glide, where it stops gliding when you let go of both notes. And I've got the Legato Glide switch, which I use most of the time. The one big addition to this is that you can choose whether it's one of the two oscillators or both of the oscillators that do glide. So you can have one note that glides and one that doesn't, and I'll show you that. It's very cool. So first, like I showed before, if I just turn glide on and I just start playing, I'm going to get glide. And if I only want the glide to happen when I hold down more than one note, I hit the legato, and now no glide until I hold down one of the notes and then hit another note. And if I want the note to re-trigger even though it's gliding, I just turn these multi-trigger buttons on, and now every strike will trigger the envelopes and have the glide. And that's linear constant rate, so short distances go quickly, long distances take longer. And if I do LCT, or linear constant time, then even short distances take just as long to get to. And exponential, where it starts quickly and then slows off as you go. And like I showed before on the other synth, we have gated, so it'll glide while the keys are down. I'm going to turn my releases up so you can hear it going after I let go. And you hear how it gets stuck in some non-Western tuning frequency in between. I rarely use that one, but there it is if you need it. And so one of the things I wanted to show with this one is that by setting yourself to legato glide and then making patterns where some of the notes have ties in between them in your sequence, now you get that TB303 acid base sort of thing. And I got a patch here, so bang 5, just 1. And now you'll hear that only some of the notes have glide, and those are the ones that have a tie from that note to the next note. And I'll slow that down so you can really hear when it's gliding and when it's not. Okay, and the last thing I want to show you is what you can do if you can assign glide independently to different oscillators. So right now I have 1 and 2 on, and so both oscillators glide together. But if I turn off one of the oscillators, so oscillator 2 is not turned on now, you're going to hear that oscillator 2 immediately jumps to the note and oscillator 1 is going to follow. And that can be a very cool effect. It helps when you're trying to simulate that you have more control over 2 different notes than you might normally on a monophonic synth. And it's just very cool when you're doing sequences and stuff to have one note going quickly and the other one kind of following behind. It's almost like reverb, but a unique new way of doing things. So today we've covered the 3 different types of glide: linear constant rate, linear constant time, and exponential. We've talked about legato glide, where the glide only works if more than one note is being held down. We talked about gated glide, which stops working the moment all keys are lit up and it just freezes wherever it was gliding at the moment, whether that's a real note or not. And I showed you what happens when you do ties in a sequence and have legato on, so the glide only works on notes that are tied because that's holding 2 notes down. If you have any questions about the Moog Matriarch synthesizer or the Moog Subsequent 37, please contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. If you enjoy this synth clip series, look down below and you'll see a link for a playlist that has all of the ones we've made so far, and you can watch them all. My name is Daniel Fisher. Thank you very much for watching.